The Samsung Galaxy S4. It's the latest in a series of insanely popular smartphones from Samsung.
Now I'm going to pause the video and enter pen edit mode.
So the first thing you see is that 4.8-inch Super AMOLED LED screen.
From the Note to the Note 2 to the Galaxy S3. This borrows from all of those devices, plus adds a lot of features and new technology. But let's start with what hasn't changed, and that's most of the look and feel of the Galaxy S4. It's almost exactly the same size as the GS3, and it's actually slightly thinner, which is a pretty impressive feat given that it has a bigger screen. It feels a lot denser than the GS3 though, and the edges have been flattened slightly so it's much more comfortable to hold. But here's the problem. The GS4 just flat out does not feel like a premium device. It's still made of slimy, slippery white plastic with silver edges and just feels gross to hold. The device itself is nicely ergonomic and it's relatively comfortable to hold, but I found myself constantly wiping my hands off thinking they were sweaty. The plastic gets dirty and picks up fingerprints like crazy, but the biggest problem is that it just makes the GS4 look and feel far less high-end than a device like the HTC One or the iPhone 5. Samsung's success has proven that people will overlook that, but it's really a shame Samsung didn't do better here. It's mostly a shame because the rest of the GS4 is actually kind of great. It starts with the screen, a 5-inch 1080p display that is absolutely gorgeous. It's a Super AMOLED display, which means it has slightly exaggerated colors and is a little over-contrasted, but it's so dense and so bright that it just looks fantastic. The camera, too, is a big step up. This is the best camera I've ever used on an Android phone, period. It's 13 megapixels, sharp and accurate, with great reproduction and just great photos. But where the camera really gets wild is in its software features. There are just so many things you can do with the GS4's camera. You can take a picture and attach sound to it with shot and sound mode. You can erase photobombers with the eraser mode. You can take big, beautiful panoramas or even create animated GIFs within the camera app itself. There's also a dual view mode that lets you shoot a picture with the front and back camera at the same time and superimpose them on each other. Its pictures aren't quite as good as a dedicated camera, but they're often close, and the feature set is just ridiculous. Actually, the feature set of the GS4 as a whole is kind of ridiculous. From a pure things it can do perspective, no phone on the planet is close to this one. And most of them are cool, but you won't use them much. There is, of course, NFC and Bluetooth and screen mirroring, either wirelessly to a Samsung TV or via HDMI, but there's plenty of new stuff too. Air Gestures lets you wave your hand over the phone to scroll through pictures or down a web page, which is neat, but the real use I found for it was waving my hand over the phone to answer it and automatically go into speakerphone, which is really handy for when you can't pick the phone up yourself. AirView is the same feature we've seen on Note devices before, which lets you hover over a calendar date or email to see a preview without clicking into it, but now it works with your finger. Some of the other features you'll use even less, and I actually turned off a few of them. There are a bunch of eye tracking features, but most of them don't work all that well. Smart Pause pauses a video when you look away from the screen, but it's hit or miss too, and I don't always want it to pause when I glance away from the screen anyway. Smart Stay figures out when you're looking at the screen and keeps it on whether you're reading or watching a movie, but you're probably better off just setting a slightly longer screen timeout in settings. You also get the multi-windowing feature from Note devices, which is pretty handy for reading an email and looking up an address, or texting and watching a video at the same time. Even if you want all these features, it's a lot to learn and figure out. Samsung's startup wizard takes a while when you first turn on the phone, and is totally necessary. The company's aware of how long it takes, though, so it offers an easy mode that basically strips everything away but big icons and a few favorite contacts. It's for your mom or your grandma to use. Even with everything going, the GS4 runs perfectly. This is a ridiculously powerful phone, and it shows. It plays heavy games well, and even basic things like swiping between home screens or launching apps is smoother than most phones I've tried. It does stumble occasionally in weird places like the gallery, which makes me think Samsung hasn't quite figured out its software. But the vast majority of the time, this phone runs Android as fast as I've ever seen. I used a T-Mobile version of the GS4, and though there is LTE on T-Mobile, I wasn't able to test it since I don't live in one of the small number of T-Mobile's LTE markets. Still, data performance is fast, call quality is solid, and reception is exactly what you'd expect. Unfortunately, bloatware is also exactly what I'd expect. You get a handful of T-Mobile apps, and when you add it to all the extra Samsung software, there's just a lot going on this phone. The worst offender is Lookout. It's a security app that insists on scanning every single app you download to make sure it's safe and give you a bunch of pop-ups letting you know whether it is or not. And of course, they were all safe because they all came from the Play Store. The GS4 also has an IR blaster, and its Watch On app lets you use it to control your TV and cable box, plus search Netflix and other apps to find stuff to watch. I like the app a lot, and found myself using the GS4 as my remote control more often than not. There's also a big list of apps that I rarely used, but I guess are sort of cool. Group Play lets you sync music among your friends' phones as long as you all have GS4s, or all play a game at the same time, which is pretty cool. Story Album lets you create scrapbooks out of your photos, which is alright, I guess. And on this list goes. S-Health is a particularly cool app, giving you a step tracker, calorie information, and lots of other Fitbit-style health info, but it's going to need some accessories before it becomes really useful. Those are coming, though. So there's a lot going on here, but even with everything turned on and running, the GS4 gets pretty solid battery life. I had no trouble getting through a full day and even partly into the next before the battery died. Though if you do have S-Health running plus all the crazy software features, things can get a little hairy. Still though, as long as you're cool with charging your phone every night, you should never have any issue with the GS4's battery. So all of this leads me somewhere. I don't really know. I don't know how to feel about the GS4. It's fast, it has a great screen, it has a huge number of software features, and I even really like a lot of them. But ultimately, I don't enjoy using this phone as much as I do the HTC One or the iPhone 5. It feels cheap and chintzy and just unimpressive. Everyone I handed the device to had the same first reaction, and it was never good. All of the elements of a perfect Android phone are out there now, but unfortunately they're still spread across 2 different devices. I think I'd buy a One personally, but I won't blame the millions of people who end up buying GS4s. And make no mistake, there will be millions.